Welcome one and all to the Stock Up Podcast, your one-stop shop for stocking up on the information you need to qualify for the Pro Tour. I am Alex Midas. He is Jacob Negro. Jacob, sir, have you recovered yet from all the traveling you've been doing?
Yeah, I'd say today I feel a lot better delaying this recording by a day because yesterday I was just so tired and ready to fall asleep.
Yeah.
So
Colorado, and Las Vegas, right? Just
Yep.
over the last month. Yikes. Sounds like a nightmare to me. Now that the Pro Tours are part of these giant Magicons, like I heard, I'm not sure if this is true, but I heard somewhere that Magicon Final Fantasy was the biggest ever. Is that right?
I'm unsure, but I certainly believe it given the set's the most selling Magic set ever.
Yeah, and I mean, you were there. I assume it was probably packed. I wondered if it was more exhausting than just a regular Pro Tour, with all the distractions of cosplayers and cool side events and just a lot of people being there in general.
No, actually, they did a very good job. They've been kind of doing a better job at this the last year. The Pro Tour was on the second floor with the artists. So there was no other events on the floor that the Pro Tour was on except for the Pro Tour. So you never had to overhear other announcements besides, I guess, one each morning about the hall being open.
Okay. Well, that's nice. That's good. One thing that was kind of nice about PCs is they're always a bit of a smaller, quieter event. So that's nice that they've been tailoring to that.
Yeah.
So for today's episode, I haven't had a chance to talk to Jacob much about his Pro Tour experience since he's been back, so I have lots of questions for him. We're just going to be talking about the Pro Tour in general, his experience, how his event went personally, standard in general, that sort of thing. And then after that, we're probably going to touch on the ban announcement that we have coming up on the 30th, and probably touch on more than just standard, since the bans could cover other formats, and we'll talk about how we feel about bans in general and whatnot. Before we get into it, I want to remind everyone that you can find us on Patreon at stockup.podcast. At the moment, we just have the one tier. It's $1 a month. For that, you get access to all of our podcasts. You'll also get access to the Stock Up Podcast Discord, where you can harass me or Jacob about anything Magic related, or really about anything at all, probably. As well as when we do our deck tech episodes, you'll get all our sideboarding guides and deck lists. Of course, if you don't want to pay $1 a month, that's totally fine. You can watch us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify for free. So without further ado, we're going to get into it. I'm just going to start by asking an open-ended question, and then I'll ask more questions as I get them. So, Jacob, how was Pro Tour Final Fantasy?
It was fun. It was pretty good. It was kind of a bit of a roller coaster as far as my record went to some degree. Not that I think I have to keep this a secret the whole episode. So I finished 9-7, but I went 5-1 in draft and 4-6 in standard. So one of my best draft records, tied with my best I've done at any of my Pro Tours, and basically tied with my worst, with the exception of missing a day 2 a single time for constructed.
What was your standard deck choice, and were you happy with it?
I played Azorius Omniscience. I would think I felt okay about it, which is roughly how I was when I submitted that deck. In the end, it looked like it actually had quite a good win rate at 56%, and comically, I thought about it a little bit more. Even though I went 4-6, I lost all 3 mirror matches I played, which meant in non-mirrors, I went 4-3, which is 56%, which means my stats were actually equal to the stats of what the graphic would have said after the tournament.
56% is really good.
Yeah,
I did notice, though, the win rates across, for example, the top 8 was all mono red and Is It Prowess, but those decks, their win rates weren't, terribly awesome. Of course, they were such a huge portion of the field.
Mono red was a 60% win rate. It was a clear.
Okay. I was just looking at Is It was below 50, right?
Yeah. No, but mono red might have just clearly been the best choice for that event. And it's interesting because, I've had prowess lists in testing that were even main decking Unable to Scream, which I think is basically the best card prowess can play against mono red. It stops the lizard for a single mana and is pretty much a decent answer to all their threats unless they get a counter on a Heartfire Hero or a Hired Claw. But it's just mono red's not that popular, so you pretty much just have to make all these changes to your prowess deck, all these little tweaks have to be focused on the mirror or maybe omniscience. And mono red is just hard to main deck cards for and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the I can't remember which standard event it was, but one of the RCs was won by mono red by, I believe, the same person who made top 8 of this tournament.
Yes, Percy Fang has been on quite the tear. They also got second at the Pioneer or Explorer, I guess, Arena Championships, also with mono red, like a month before.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it clearly has a good prowess matchup. Is mono red, is that a deck you guys considered, you and your team?
Some people I think definitely did. I've played some games with it against our team's Roots deck. Not with self-destruct though. We saw the self-destruct list kind of pop up at the last moment, which I thought was yet another reason I didn't play Roots. A lot of my team, Flex Slot Diamond, did play Roots, Jund Roots specifically, which did not have a very good showing at the Pro Tour. I, on Monday, as of recording the last podcast, actually thought that was a deck I was going to play. And I guess effectively what happened is Tuesday morning, I woke up and decided that's just the deck needed a lot more work. And I was testing remotely and they were in a house. And it seemed like a lot of my team felt the same way. But a lot of them being in that house decided to put in the work. And instead is roughly when I decided I would play Omniscience. I obviously thought Prowess was a very good deck. And I guess even you could call it the best deck in Standard. But I just wasn't sure. Like, there's a lot of different ways you can play Prowess, and I was still felt kind of clueless, to be honest, as to, like, should I play without VV, with VV? Should I play Dragecatcher? I think the answer is a clear yes. In hindsight, the Dragecatcher is probably one of the best cards the Prowess list could have played because it's one of their best cards against mono red in the mirror. But yeah, Omniscience, I felt like my list was going to probably be like 70 of the correct 75. I didn't really stress about it. There's a few times I thought, should I really play this card or should I add this card? And instead of really thinking about it, I said, I'm just going to do another draft. So
yeah, I mean, that's fair. I heard the advice for the first time from Gabriel Nassif, where, I mean, and of course he plays a lot of Pro Tours, where he just thinks nowadays in Standard it's pretty hard to get an edge, and so you should just pick a deck that's one of the good decks that you're comfortable with and just lock it in early and focus on draft.
Yeah, and 4 and 6 is not a record I'm super happy with, but also, to be honest, like, I think one of my Omniscience mirrors, I made a horrible punt, and then versus Boros Monument, I think I approached the matchup wrong, so I think 2 of my losses could have easily been wins, and then I also, went 0-2 in another 2 Omniscience mirrors where I think I played pretty reasonably, and I just think, that's just kind of losing a mirror match in a traditional fashion.
Yeah, but the deck, 56% win rate, and you said it felt good on your side too, besides mirror matches. And
yeah, and I played against Prowess 4 times, I think, and I went 3-1 against it, so also not.
It's pretty good.
Nothing to scoff at,
Is the inclusion of VV, does that make their deck slower, or like is that a good card against you?
Yeah, so it makes their deck slower, and I main decked a couple Get Lost in my Omniscience lists to kind of hedge for VV. Including at the cost, like I had a 4th temporary lockdown on my sideboard, which is pretty atypical. But I said this in the last round against a friend of mine, Adam, where I said, you have the main deck VVs and I have the Get Lost. You'd think that would be good for me, but by now I just think, I'd rather my Prowess opponents didn't have VV because it's just a really broken card.
Okay,
and I just
fair
think
enough.
Their deck is better all around by including that card.
It did seem like most people included it. I know some people did not at all. But,
yeah, all of my opponents had it. I played against Sperling, who was on the CFB list, which had the least. He had a 1-1 split of VV. That was the least amount I played against.
Interesting. Well, so you did good in draft. How'd your drafts go? I mean, 5-1, that's kind of an example of what Gab's talking about, where you can get a huge edge or a huge leg up just in draft if you're... I mean, obviously you didn't do terribly well in Constructed, but you ended with a pretty decent record just because you're drafting.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think this process was also interesting. It's always useful to have a team to discuss about drafts, so I'm glad I did. But, for the most part, I think I formed a lot of opinions on my own. But, it kind of fills the gaps to have a team, and there's some cards you just don't have time to get experience with, especially rares and mythic rares. So having that type of meeting where basically you go over every rare and mythic rare, and I'd prefer like a rule of if you haven't seen it in the game, don't talk in the meeting, which I think we basically kind of followed, and then from there you just get people's thoughts about that card that have actually seen it in play.
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting rule. I guess I don't think I've ever worked with a team in limited. I've worked with a team for constructed once, but I think that was an online PT, so there was
Yeah.
no limited. Yeah. How'd your first draft go? So when at the PT, for those of you who don't know, the first thing you do when you get there is you draft. You do 3 rounds of draft, and then you do your constructed rounds to see if you qualify for day 2.
Yeah, so I've got my decks in front of me, and I've got a pretty good memory of some of the key things. So also, I guess at large in Final Fantasy, I've found I typically draft more aggressively slanted decks. But I talked with my testing partner and hotel roommate Dan Weiser a lot the day before, and I agreed with him that it seemed like blue is one of the stronger colors in the set. Mostly backed by Sahagin being a great common, and in fact, I would probably even say Sahagins like the best common creature in the set. Not the best common, but just a solid 2-drop that's really easy to build into. And I've just played a lot of this format as kind of aggressive decks, and I think I've learned a lot of my own lessons that way. So I definitely have a preference towards that, but I don't really have color preferences. I found that I can make it kind of work in all colors. But certainly white is like the premier one for aggro, but I think blue is also like the least aggressive color, but you can certainly still pack some like punch with Sahagin into, especially with the second color helping.
Right, and blue-red in particular is one of the best performing decks, at least win rate-wise, based on 17 lands. And blue-red is pretty much just aggressive. I mean, I've drafted like control decks that are usually like blue-black with red, that sort of thing. But just the blue-red archetype where you got the red uncommons and you're tapping out for 4 more non-creatures that cost 4 more is usually aggressively slanted.
Yep. So anyways, to get into the draft, so my pod has, notable people are Matt Costa, who has a PT top 8 for those that you don't know, and is generally known as quite the limited master, I think. I'm sure he has plenty of Grand Prix top 8s as well. And then Jake Beardsley, who won Pro Tour Lord of the Rings, was in my pod as well. And then I guess those are really the only names I recognize when I sat down. My first round opponent, his name is Peter Usisian, and I realized later he won RC Portland. But anyways, in my draft, so also, these are timed drafts for those of you that don't know. I think we've mentioned that in a previous episode. So you have, a certain amount of time and you do each pick one at a time. The packs are sleeved for this event, given the double face cards. So you do not reveal your double face cards at the table. And also you cannot read the backs of the cards while you're drafting them. You have to have memorized them or hope you know what they do.
When did they make that change? It used to be that when you opened cards, you had to reveal it to the table if they had a flip side.
Yeah, it varies from event to event. I think at the Pro Tour nowadays, they heavily prefer that, but it depends how rare, I guess, the double face cards are. I would guess if there was only like a single double face card in the set, they would do the reveal thing and not sleeve the packs. I guess an example of this is at the Spotlight Series in Denver I played on day 2, in fact. There are no normal double face cards, but some of the special versions of the cards, specifically certain dragons and Ugin, are double faced with like a little baby version of themselves and a regular version, and you did have to reveal those if you open them at the table.
Interesting. You think they just have a one rule across the board, but anyways.
Yeah. So I opened my pack, and my pack has Bruce Tarl Boorish Herder, which is a bonus sheet card. 2 red, white, 3/3. It has partner for commander. It's a legendary human, and when it enters or attacks, target creature you control gains double strike and life link until end of turn. And it also has, I forget his full name, Gaius, who's 3 black for a 4/4. And when he enters, you pick a creature, and all other creatures get -2/-2. And then once that creature you picked dies, he flips into an 8/8 flying. I don't actually have any experience playing with Bruce in draft, but it's a pretty straightforward card. I really like white red. And that's actually what I
sounds
picked
great
here.
to me.
Yeah, I just think
like
it's
a really strong card.
Gaius, is also a strong rare and a card I'd probably be pretty happy first picking in this format. But given I have this preference towards aggro, and I think Bruce is just a card that can really almost solo a game in these equipment type decks. So I thought that was a pretty clear pick, to be honest. It's also, you could be a white green or white red or red green deck. and splash him, and he'd probably be pretty powerful, especially with the sizing of green creatures.
Yeah, so I've had Gaius a couple times, and I've actually found him to be a little awkward. Like,
Yeah,
it's definitely a good card, but not all the time.
Yeah, I agree. Whereas Bruce, I think just, that ETB and attack trigger can really steal the game. He can target himself. You can get equipments on him. That matters. Targeting himself matters because oftentimes these creatures, if they attack, they might be pretty vulnerable. He's only a 3/3, but the fact that you can put just a white mage's staff on him or something, he's attacking as a 4/4 double strike lifelink, means he's probably not going to be easy to trade off with in combat and things like that.
Yeah.
So from there, I take a suplex. I take a Gala Cat. Both cards I really like. I'm kind of thinking red white's looking good, and then I get a pack 1 pick for Shantoto, which I think is basically the best gold uncommon. That's
the 3-mana 04.
Yep.
Yep.
That incentivizes you for casting non-creature spells that cost 4 more. I don't think this pack had anything kind of premium in a white-red aggro deck anyways, so it ends up being my pick. And then I get 2 Sahagins and a Syncopate and a Fire Magic that pack at the least, plus I had already picked the Suplex.
Okay.
So
and Fire Magic is quite a good card, but it's not very good in red-white.
Yeah, I'm definitely feeling like I'm a blue-red deck, and I think I have outs to splashing Bruce Tarl. Is kind of where I'm feeling after pack 1. I also picked up a blue-red dual lands, which is kind of nice for the sake of fixing, even if it's not specifically biased towards red-white. It makes your mana better all around, which means, putting like a basic plains in your deck or things like that is less costly. Pack 2 is interesting. So to add more to the nuances of a PT draft, they kind of put a band around the cards, and one of the cards is face down, which actually I don't even think it needs to be, but I guess while opening the bands, they'd prefer that no one could see the bottom card. And you're supposed to, take the pack, take the band off the pack, take one of the cards, it's usually the bottom card, but in my experience, not always, flip it the right direction, and then count out the pack and make sure it's 14 cards. And then also this event, make sure the sleeves weren't marked because they were sleeved, or even if they weren't sleeved, the cards could sometimes be marked. You're just supposed to be checking the backs of them, making sure they look normal. Not that I think this is a major advantage or anything, and not that I'm trying to do this, but I'll say what happened when I went to flip over the card. I'm not trying to catch a glimpse of it, but I'm also not just gonna like try to do an action holding cards, not looking away entirely, because dropping the cards would be a total disaster. I see it's a gold 4/5. I set down the pack and counting it. I realize that card's Kefka. So I guess I have an extra 20 seconds or whatever to think about what Kefka could mean in my deck. And I'm already blue-red. A more interesting development, when I open this pack, another rare in the pack is Memories Returning.
Which one is that?
That's the 2 blue, reveal the top 5 cards of your library, and you and your opponent take turns putting them into your hand or whatever, and the others
Yeah, that card's sick.
on the bottom. Or like you put one in your hand, they put one on the bottom, you put one in your hand, they put one on the bottom, the last one goes to your hand. And it's flashback for 9. Obviously, also, it's a card that, goes perfect in this blue-red spells deck I've drafted. So this might have been a controversial pick, but I took Kefka. I've had Kefka twice already practicing in this event, and I just think it's the type of card. First of all, when you think about if you played Kefka and the ETB happened, sometimes you get 2 cards off it, and then if your opponent kills it, like they discarded a card, they used a removal spell, and you discarded a card and drew 2 cards, it is a 3-for-1, which is what Memories Returning already is. But it's just a card that when they don't have an answer to it, you effectively just win the game.
Yeah, Kefka's insane, and definitely better than Memories Returning.
Yeah. So I thought it was,
you did already have a
blue-red
white splash rare, though, is my thought.
Yeah, that was my thought too. But then I started thinking about it more. Bruce Tarl is not really at its best with cards like Sahagin and Shantoto. And in fact, the blue-red spells deck is really clogged on wanting 4-drops that are non-creatures. And I don't know. I just didn't want to give up the opportunity to take Kefka, which is a card that just kind of can single-handedly win a game. Whereas Memories Returning is a card that, could put you really far ahead in the game, and it's a lot of card advantage. But ultimately, you're going to draw like 2 spells in a land, sometimes even 1 spell and 2 lands.
Yeah, I can see it going either way. But so you take Kefka. I take it.
Yeah. So I have the Kefka. At this point, the blue-red spells deck is just coming together pretty well. I'm looking at my stamps here. It is pack 2. I get a second copy of Fire Magic. Which is the 1 mana deal 1 to all creatures, but you can tier it up to deal 2 or even 3 damage. And as I'm drafting my deck, I don't actually have any like Dragoons, Wyverns, or anything. The deck pretty much is just blue-red from there on. I get a Ultimisia that I also splash for fixing. I end up getting a red-black duel, a blue-black duel, and a world map. And kind of calling back to that sealed episode, I do end up just playing 1 swamp and splashing my 2 black 5-drops off of effectively 4 sources, which I feel pretty good about. They're both 5-drops too, so they come up a little later in the game. I have a little bit of card draw. I end up with like an eject and 2 suplexes, 2 syncopates. So, a fair amount of removal, not all perfect. I have a Light of Judgment as well to answer some bigger stuff. And then like Dreams of Laguna, Quistis Trepe for some 2-for-1s, Retrieve the Esper, and Sorcerer's of Schemes, also 2-for-1s. So I'm feeling really good about my deck as I'm building.
Yeah, you sent me your deck list during the event. I thought it looked quite nice, both from having played in a couple of Pro Tours and also having, like, I like to watch coverage of the drafts. It's pretty common for Pro Tour drafts to have lower powered decks just because all the players at the table are usually quite good, and so they're going to really fight you for the good cards and the good archetypes. So when I saw that you had what was probably the best archetype with lots of cheap removal, you had several of the uncommons, a really good curve,
yeah, I had
a
2
bomb
the
rare
Emperor of Palamecia that I got in packs 2 and 3.
Yeah, I thought that was definitely pretty above average deck.
Yeah, I agree.
Pro Tour.
And then also really notably, like, my deck is quite an excellent Fire Magic deck, and I have 2 of them because I'm not playing any of the small creatures really. And that comes into play in my draft matches. So, notably, I guess as a decision, I kept Shambling Seath. That's the 2-mana or the 3-mana 3/3 black creature that enters tapped, and you can return from graveyard to your hand with non-creature spells. And Resentful Revelation in my sideboard, but heavily considered boarding them in alongside a swamp in many spots. The reason I didn't really choose that for my main deck decision was actually because of the 2 copies of the Emperor of Palamecia. That's the card you really want to play on turn 2, and it's not a card that really wants you to have basic swamp in your deck.
Yeah, I don't think I would play either of those cards. I mean, maybe if you're in a really grindy matchup, but...
Yeah, and part of it too is I was pretty happy with all but like one of my spells in my deck. I'd say the last card I played in my deck was Matoya Archon Elder, the rare 3-mana 1/4. And, my only synergies with that were Dreams of Laguna and Ultimecia, which are both nice because they're they can both trigger that card multiple times.
Yeah, it's a 1/4. It's
it mostly is like a 1/4 that your opponent's probably going to be really scared of and aggressively use removal on, too. They don't know how good it is in your deck.
Although I will say if you know the format well, there's very few cards that trigger it.
Yeah, but Dreams of Laguna is kind of a very obvious one, and that's also a card that I'm going to be drafting to premium in my archetype anyways. Also to add to this, so I got this was a talk in my Pro Tour thing. I think Sorcerer's of Schemes is just a great card in this format in these decks. Red black or red blue. That's the 3 and a red, return an instant sorcery from your graveyard or exiled with flashback from to your hand and add a red, and as flashback itself. Just triggers these cast 4 or more multiple times, and removals at such a premium that rebuying your removal spells is a huge deal, even for such a clunky cost.
I haven't tried it in black-red, but it is quite good in blue-red.
Yeah. And
kind of surprisingly, actually. It doesn't look that good.
I got this card, 12th pick in the 3rd pack.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Yeah. So anyways, my first round against Peter, the RC Portland champion, he's playing a white-blue deck, splashing red for some removal, like Thunder Magic. And he was also, I believe, 2 seats to my right. So kind of interesting that I got this blue-red deck through him when he's kind of taking the blue spells aggressively. That also means he saw the Shantoto. He had Cloud Midgar Mercenary in his deck, but only 1 equipment to get, and it was Crystal Fragments, so that was interesting. He had 2 combat tutorials and the memories returning that I assumedly passed his direction in pack 2. Game 1, I got very flooded and lost. Game 2, I was kind of stuck on lands and thought I was losing. He had his Zidane that he did to hit me for some damage. That's the active treason with lifelink creature. He combat tutorial to make it bigger. I was getting kind of low. I was able to finally stick Ultimecia. I surveilled Kefka to the top. I have a 4/5 now. He had a 4/4 and a 2/1, the Cloud, and he did not immediately kill my creature either. I think he would have put me to 2 life if he could have. And then I untap and play Kefka, and from there I pretty easily win. I play pretty conservatively because I feel so far ahead that I'd usually leave 2 blockers back so he couldn't just kill one of my blockers and put me to 1, but I'd retrieve the Esper and stuff at that point too. Game 3, I win in kind of a more traditional fashion. I think I had Kefka on turn 6 or something and just drew my good cards pretty ahead. I think I had a very strong Fire Magic that game to kind of just one-sided Wrath as small creatures at some point. Round 2, I play against Jake Beardsley. His game 1 draw, it's pretty weak. He has a Titus, Blitzball Star, and he plays a Genji Gloves, and I think it sure would be nice to draw one of my suplexes right now, and I draw a suplex, and I'm so far ahead of board that I suplex the Titus and not the Genji Gloves because he has no other creatures in play, and I don't think he's really, even if he could play something and equip it, I just don't think he's going to be able to lethal me or anything. Game
That's
2,
funny. We were bashing that Genji Glove and Sealed.
Yeah.
I really don't think I'd play it in draft, but
yeah, it's a card. I've gotten games stolen by it more recently too. Like the night before the Pro Tour, I did an arena draft, and my opponent just had a 6/6 frog and one shot me.
Yeah, I could see it.
It seems better in like compared to the green big mana decks, though, to be fair, because you'll have larger creatures and 8 mana, and kind of doing it all in one turn is a big deal. Like your opponent knowing you have it is a huge deal.
Mm-hmm.
Game 2, he has a pretty aggressive draw, and I try to stabilize, but then he actually has Absolute Virtue, which I had a copy of Eject for, but then I wasn't in a position to beat it a second time.
That's the 8/8.
Yep.
Can't lose the
countered
game
either,
card.
so I can't syncopate it. So my only out to that card in my deck is actually Eject. I do have Quistis Treppe, so I don't have to be that conservative with my one copy of Eject. I can flash it back later. I guess I have other outs like combining Light of Judgment and Suplex or things like that, but a single card answer is only that. And then game 3, very funny, or not funny, but kind of showcasing the power of Fire Magic. At some point in that game, Jake has like 3 creatures that are roughly all job select creatures, I think, but they all have 2 or less toughness, and he had just played Grahatia into my... I had just already slammed Kefka, and previously he had cast Sleep Magic on my 2/4 Sahajin, and I had Suplex your 3/5, cast Fire Magic, deal 2 to everything, and kill his entire board and his Sleep Magic.
Fire Magic is such a nasty card. It keeps going up in my pick order. The thing that's so nice about it is that the floor is so low and the ceiling is so high, so it's just kind of the perfect card.
In round 1 versus Peter, I should add, like, at some point you played Dragoon's Wyvern, and I just killed it for 1 mana, like both parts of the card.
Yeah, and that's like one of the more tame outcomes for it too.
Yeah, in my deck, having almost nothing that really gets punished by it itself. I never got to cast it for 6 mana and do all my triggers, but I cast it for 3 mana every round, and basically Plague Wended my opponent with it, including the final round versus Gabriel, who was on a Jun's deck that, for the most part, he played a lot of 2-for-1 stuff. Like, he had multiple copies of Vanille and Heck Dies, and he had a lot of removal. His deck seemed solid, but nothing really over the top and powerful. And both games were just a matter of me casting a Fire Magic and killing. Even though, like, all these creatures are roughly 2-for-1s or close, like, I just cast Fire Magic, and he was so far behind on board 2 games in a row.
Just as a tangent, did you guys have that in any of your red standard decks?
I'm not sure my prowess teammates registered it in their sideboard. I don't think they registered Pyroclasm either, though. So it's not like they made that decision. I think we all agreed that if we wanted that slot, Fire Magic was probably going to be better. But I just think they didn't have space for it, given there's not really like a deck you expect for it to be great against in the format.
Yeah. Looking through a lot of the lists for the standard decks, I was a little bit surprised. Not hugely surprised. Like, I didn't expect a lot of cards to see play, but I was surprised by how little Final Fantasy cards see play. Even things like small sideboard cards like that just didn't show up.
Yeah. So I threw out my draft, feeling really good about it.
Yeah, that's great.
I won round 3 pretty fast, and the way the Pro Tours work is there's a 30-minute lunch break that starts basically when round 3 would end. And I 2-0'd my opponent there was like 30 minutes on the clock still. My games, like I said, they were really fast. It was basically just Fire Magic, who's so far behind on board. And from there, I ended the game. So I had like an hour. I managed to get like actually a pretty decent lunch from a food truck outside, not just convention center food. So I was pretty happy about that. Then standard pairings come up. I look at Melee on my phone. It says my opponent's name is TGO with just a capital T, not even in like an initialism. And I don't know what that is. And I think, it might just be some foreign name I'm unfamiliar with. And then as I sit down, I think TGO, like the great one, like Bob Marr. And then sure enough, Bob Marr walks in front of me, and he's my opponent.
Oh, wow. Funny. And, so that's just what he writes down on the...
That's his Discord name, is just TGO with just a capital T, not a...
On Discord? Nice.
Yeah. Not Discord. Yeah, Melee, sorry. Melee name.
Melee, yeah, sure.
He's playing Omniscience also. He has a main deck Cutzel's Flanker, which is an annoying card for the mirror. Otherwise, kind of the same kill con. He's playing Refute instead of Confounding Riddle. Just pretty stock list otherwise, I'd say. Game 1, He wins via combo. We're both playing it kind of slow. All my Omniscience mirrors kind of game one often played out kind of slow, where because we have like at least one main deck spell pierce and also potentially a counter spell like Riddle, people are often just passing and kind of setting up. It's kind of funny because in each spot that came up for me game one this weekend, I'm definitely the type to like jam if I don't have plays that I think are better, but each time I had my one Riddle or spell pierce, so I felt somewhat safe.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I'd feel, especially with only 2 counters total, I'd feel pretty tempted to jam a lot of the time.
Yeah, but it's interesting because like instead it's like, well, I can pass with coil and catch here and not just lose to them countering my spell and untapping with the combo. Like
Right.
oftentimes that was the position I was in. I lose simply because I don't find Abuelo's Awakening. He even tapped out on multiple turns. I had the Omniscience in my graveyard, no Abuelos. Game 2 is a much longer game, really drawn out. He's got Cavern of Souls on Warrior, which is the type of Cutzel's flanker, so he has like uncounterable Cutzel's flanker he's passing with a lot. I end up getting a lot ahead on cards through like Dragon Storms and bouncing it. I boarded in my Clarion Conqueror, and I think I boarded and bounced 2 Dragon Storms with it at some point. And I end up winning that game with a 10 mana Omniscience with Spell Pierce backup. It's a very long game. Game 3, we have like 10 minutes going into the clock. We're playing really fast. I keep a 2-lander on the draw, and I miss on the 3rd land entirely and just get kind of run over.
So your plan for the mirror, you don't really bring in the, like I assume you have you have the
Overlord.
Overlords. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't bring in the white Overlords. At least I didn't in that match. I bring in like Flanker, and I leave in 2 Get Lost, but not bring in a 3rd. You board out all your temporary lockdowns and dispersals. Bring in some counter spells, Voice of Victory. I bring in Clarion Conqueror because I did not register Ghost Vacuum or Soul Guide Lantern. All of my Omniscience opponents this tournament did. So I bring in Clarion Conqueror to kind of cover that, also to be kind of a threat that can pick away at their life. Notably, Bob did bring in Overlord of the Mist Wars.
Can block voice and bounce your Dragon Storms too.
So the Clarion Conqueror, I'd feel pretty good about bringing it in the mirror to check their 1 vacuum. I'm a big believer in like matching my answers to like their things, if that makes sense. Like having some removal for their Voice of Victory is a big reason why I have Get Lost in the Mirror, and having Clarion Conqueror for their vacuum I think is pretty nice. Also, coincidentally, that game versus Bob, it covered me against his 2-1 flyings.
Yeah, checks out.
So next round, I play against Michael, who's playing White Black Pixie, which is probably like a pretty known good matchup for Omni, but I'm not sure that's the case with his deck list. His deck list included 3 Bandits Talents and 3 or 4 Dark Confidants in the main deck.
Remind me what Bandit's Talent is.
So it's 1 in the black, and when it enters, your opponent either discards 1 non-land card or 2 land cards.
Okay.
And then it kind of has like a rack effect as you level it up, where like if you, for 1 black mana, you can level it, and if your opponent, if their upkeep has 1 or fewer cards, they take 2 damage.
Yeah, gotcha.
It's a really annoying thing to bounce, and that's what came up in game 1. He played it. I kept a land heavy hand, but also mulliganing against the card Bandit Talent and Hopeless Nightmare isn't very, very nice strategy either. I think my hand even had the combo for the most part, just really land heavy, something like Dragonstorm Omni, Abuelos, and 4 lands. But I'm just like not able to get the lands because of the Bandit Talent on the draw getting played on 2 and 3. So that was pretty backbreaking. Game 2, I board in Overlords. I leave in like a mix of my combo and non-combo, but the card I'm most worried about, as I boarded all out, was actually Temporary Lockdown, because he had many answers to it in his sideboard, multiple Lorans and like 3 Destroy Evils and a main deck Get Lost. And I just think the value of their cards re-entering is like kind of game over if it happens. But I'm not sure in hindsight if that was correct. Maybe I just have to hope that doesn't happen, or that they can't afford to bring in that many cards. Anyways, my opponent has Duress into Hopeless Nightmare, Pixie, into Duress, Hopeless Nightmare, and Pixie again in their first 3 turns, and I get kind of run over without really a hands. So I lose that one pretty easily. Round 6, I'm against Raul, another Omniscience Mirror. I won't say this too negatively, but a really weird moment of game 3. I'm beating him down with my Clarion Conqueror. He has a Ghost Vacuum in his sideboard. I'm passing with counterspells a lot, but then he sticks a Voice of Victory. It doesn't have the combo though. So the counterspell plan's not working, but I'm feeling pretty good about this 3 damage a turn from the Clarion Conqueror, and I think I got him to like 6 even. And then a card he plays to help stabilize him is his own copy of Clarion Conqueror, which is a little bizarre to me. He didn't see that I had it in game 2, and he's the one with Ghost Vacuum. So it's like a card that stops his own sideboard card in the matchup, and none of mine. But that was good enough. I mean, Meringue River Regents are ultimately what kind of ended that game. He just had a lot more land drops and flexibility than I did. I was kind of stuck on lands for a while and couldn't double spell very much. So another loss so far, 0-3 in Constructed. Next round against Alexander on Boros Monument. I win game 1 in pretty typical Omniscience fashion, and then I think I messed up by first going completely off my combo and then going lower on my combo, though both sideboard games, he drew both his sideboard vacuums, so I'm not sure the combo would have worked out very well, but I also think that the card Boros Monument, the card Monument of Endurance is actually pretty hard for me to interact with, even though I can interact with all the creatures pretty well. But he was just getting so much value in burning me out with them in these longer games that I actually think I'm just kind of forced to stay pretty lean and on my combo in that matchup in hindsight.
Is this Alexander Hayne?
No, this is Alexander Cons.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So another loss. I've gone 3-0 to 0-4. I'm really worried about not making day 2.
Yeah.
Not feeling great. That round in particular, tough. Too, I could tell, I was playing bad. I missed multiple Overlord and Pending triggers that probably cost me the game, to be honest, in game 3. So not feeling great. In round 8, that I see I'm paired against Jason Ye on Prowess. I guess you might have been out of the scene. Jason Ye, they were basically player of the year last year, or rookie of the year, the year they went on the Pro Tour. They've top-aided multiple Pro Tours. I've drafted with them. They won one of the Vegas limited Grand Prix, the one that was Wilds of Eldraine. Really accomplished in their first year on the game. That's how they qualified for the first Pro Tour, was winning that event. And
wow, it's pretty cool.
Anyways, is it Prowess? I sit down. I mention that I have 3-0'd my draft and I'm 3-4 now, and they are in the same situation. So that's like a little relieving to think, somebody else is kind of experiencing the same thing. Some condolences. But then the really bizarre part is then we get called for a feature match. And it was not on camera. I checked. We were under a camera, but did not make coverage.
I also checked.
I guess it was on camera, but did not.
It was like it was a backup.
Yeah, probably. Fourth backup. Kind of very almost cruel in my mind to see which player ends up going 0-5 in Constructed and not making it 2 after a 3-0. Fortunately for me, I won that match. Pretty normal Omni gameplay. I did board out my entire combo for game 2, and I got very lucky and drew a lot of my counter spells early. Countered Jason's Stock Up and Ral on turns 3 and 4, things like that. Played to kind of win with Overlord and Dragons, which is not something I do all the time, but that's kind of the slower Prowess list I was against, and I thought it would be a little bit more suitable there, especially because it involves boarding in stuff like No More Lies, which I think will just play out a little better.
So I imagine you have to be pretty happy, considering you looked like you were doomed.
Yeah, I was pretty relieved to make day 2. For context, I've played 18 Pro Tours now, and I've made day 2 at all but one of them. So I feel
it's easy. It's real easy.
It's definitely pretty familiar to me. And the one time I didn't make 2, it totally sucked, and I'm sure it still totally sucks. The other really important thing is, I'm trying to qualify for Worlds, and I think missing on a day 2 is basically a death sentence unless I basically get 12 wins at the next Pro Tour or better. But the AMP slots become completely worthless. So day 2 is a huge deal on this race for Worlds that I'm part of. So I'm really
that's what I was happiest to hear about for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I get a pretty good night's rest, just eat some dinner. I tried to go 2 different places for dinner first. They were both packed. Ended up getting Ethiopian food, which I'd never had before, which was
good.
Culture shock. It tasted fine, but a bit of a culture shock for me to eat with your hands and no utensils.
Oh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And it's not like finger food either. Like you're just like eating meat with sauce on it, and just.
Could you ask for?
I don't know. No one at my table was, so it doesn't seem like you can.
I thought I had Ethiopian food, but maybe I haven't. Because I've never done that.
Maybe they figured they have more business with forks.
Yeah, maybe. Well, you're in Vegas. You got to do it touristy style, I guess. I don't know.
So I also get to view kind of my draft pod the next day, because the draft pods are just done by standings. And so I see my draft pod the next day. The only name I recognize, to be honest, is Patrick Chapin. Um, he ends up being the person directly to my right in this pod. And so I guess I'll go over that draft now. This one is a lot less straightforward of a draft. I start with a first pick Vanille, which I think is a great first pick. It's the 4-mana 3/2 that mills 2 and returns a permanent. And then I second pick Dragoon's Lance, which I believe might be my rank 1 uncommon in the set now, actually. I know last week I might have said Summon Fenrir roughly if we talked about Sealed, but I think Dragoon's Lance for draft is probably the non-rare card I'm happiest to first pick.
How much do you like white in the set?
I like it a lot. Like I said, the aggro decks, I feel pretty comfortable with them. I've drafted a lot of green-white aggro, in fact, preparing for this tournament. So picking Vanilla and Dragoon's Lance is not that weird to me. But the draft just gets a little weirder. I don't remember exactly what order I have things in. I could see from pack 1, I got like Chocobo Kit, Slash of Light, Gaelic Cat. So some pretty solid cards. But then I remember I got a late Zidane, Tantalus Thief, the Boros 5-drop Legend Uncommon, which acts Treasons, which I think is a pretty powerful card. And I think, I'm green-based, so splashing wouldn't be that weird. Oh, I also see I wield a Starting Town, so that also helps splashing. Starting Town, I think, is like
Starting Town is kind of crazy.
I think it's a pretty good land in this format. Like,
yeah, I would just play it in every deck.
Yeah, I agree.
So it's surprised to wheel it.
Yeah. And then pack 2, I think I get past a second pick Gilgamesh, which I think is kind of a bomb of a card. Not the bonus sheet Godo, but the actual main set 6-mana 6/6 Gilgamesh, not the 6-mana 3/3.
Yeah, it's basically a Titan if you build your deck right.
Yeah, so I start kind of leaning into it a little bit more. I don't know if I'd already picked this Torgal I have, but I have even like a world map, I think. And I see I got a Gungaga in pack 1, the red-green lands as well. So I feel kind of good about just being a Naya deck, and maybe I splash Vanille or something like that instead of the other way. But then as the draft comes along, I'm kind of thinking, even by the end of pack 2, that I could just straight splash a double red card. My mana's so good. I know that's kind of bizarre, but it just works out that way. Also, I wheel Terra Magical Adept, which I don't think is weird to wheel. At that point in time, I had no enchantments, and actually by the end of this draft, I have no enchantments, but I still play it. It's a 3-mana 4/2 that flips into a 6/6 flying. It's not a high pick, but it wasn't a high pick for me in the draft.
Yeah, that's fair. It's funny, that card obviously can be extremely good, but there isn't actually that many enchantments. There's the Saga creatures, and that's basically it.
Yeah. And then there's maybe like
obviously
a key moment that could matter. I see in pack 2, I also picked up Renoa Hardly, so great green-white card. I got a white Aura Sight. Some things going my way, for sure. Pack 3, I don't remember what card I opened, but Chapin passes me Genova. And that's the black-green rare. That's a complete bomb. Better than any card I've drafted, I would say. And I already had 2 world maps, it looks like. No, maybe 1 world map. And just 1 world map and Torgal and Starting Town. So I already have a fair amount of ability to cast this card. So I take it, totally intending to splash a 4th color in my deck.
Yeah, it makes sense. That's the 1/5 that puts counters up every combat.
Yeah, and makes things a mutant, draws cards.
You can draw an absurd amount of cards. Yeah.
I knew this going into the format because I studied the creature types for ones that mattered. Zidane as a mutant, so that's kind of cute.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the Boros 5-drop. Not often the same deck with the Golgari 4-drop, but in my deck, I had a second mutant already.
I had no idea.
It looks like I got a Gladiolus. Maybe that's what I pack 1 picked one out of this pack. The 6-drop landfall +2/+2, trample to another creature and it searches for any land. And I try to pick up some equipments while I can. Notably, I think one of the more interesting picks, because I was really worried about my curve, and I still kind of wanted to be an aggressively leaning slanted deck, and I already had some kind of top-endy bomb cards. I took a Monk's Fist over Summon Fat Chocobo, and I stand by that pick. I think just any extra equipment I could have. I think Monk's Fist is actually not like a premium card, but a totally playable card in this format.
Yeah, I've liked that card quite a bit as a 2-drop. I mean, 2-drops are important. There's lots of artifact synergies. There's equipment synergies. It's much better than it looks. Usually the common artifact cards are bad.
Yeah, and then as far as more fixing goes, I see I picked up the red-black dual land, another world map, and a Farseek in pack 3 to kind of tie together my weird ramp aggro deck. but I feel pretty good about it. I guess I also got a Pack 3 Pick 8 Wandering Minstrel that I didn't end up playing once I kind of counted my towns out and thought about my deck a little bit more, even though I did have a white-blue dual land in my sideboard as well.
Wandering Minstrel is...
The lands you control enter untapped rare that wants to have 5 or more towns. But ultimately, my deck could have only had 6 towns. I didn't play the white-blue one or Wind Minstrel, so I only had 5 towns. I got Ishgard, the Holy Sea, as one of my rares. That's the white adventure land as well. Not when I opened or anything, but past.
Yeah.
It kind of came up for me in one of my games where my opponent didn't want to attack and trade into my poo-poo UFO because they knew it was in my hand for the world map. So...
usually that card pretty much only works with the saga creatures, which you don't have any.
Yeah. It also makes Terra mill 5, I guess, somewhat more relevant, because if I mill one of my equipments, I could get it back.
Yeah. How good was Gilgamesh for you? I see that you only ended up with 4
equipment. Yeah. I would say like
it's on the low end.
Pretty likely to hit between the top 12 cards, so it's still like a very threatening thing. That it's a 6/6 that like would kind of dominate in a board stall, I think, between the ETB and attack trigger. And then the fact that I have Dragoon's Lance is like a premium one to have, because giving him flying is just going to end the game, basically.
Right. Yeah. I mean, hitting Warrior Sword is...
Yeah.
When you just play him is going to be pretty much any. I mean, you hit
Bard's Bow is also fine. Monk's Fist is definitely on the lower end. Also comically, there's equipment sub theme in my Genova's deck. I did equip Monk's Fist to Genova at one point, which is kind of a little combo because you distribute more plus and plus encounters because it puts them equal to her power.
Oh, nice! I didn't even notice that.
Yeah,
I haven't actually played with that card yet.
Okay,
so.
yeah, I've had the fortune of playing with a lot, and actually, I'll preface. So I 2-1s this draft, and I actually only drew Genova a single game in the entire draft. So my deck actually had some power without that card. Clearly.
Yeah. I mean, it looks like a solid mid-range deck.
Yeah, it definitely just has really high card quality.
Yeah.
So I kind of beat people on that axis. I lost round 1 to white-black. Nothing special. Game 1. I kind of keep the lower end of card quality in my hand, but it's a functioning hand, and get kind of ground out by Fight On and Malboro, stuff like that. Typical white-black stuff. I have a lot of time. I have perfect mana and 6 or more lands in play a lot of the game, and never draw one of my most powerful cards. And in game 2, I have a 1-lander and a 0-lander that I mulligan, end up on 5 cards. Even through turn 2 Hex Dies, when I'm on the play, I managed to cast Renoa Hurtley on turn 4 because I had Farseek, but it gets answered, and I kind of don't have any more gas after that. That was against Albert. The next opponent, his name was Jaime. He was black-green, but he seemed like kind of a lower power deck. He had 2 diamond weapons, but he didn't draw a lot of his self-mill stuff. He actually ended up casting the 4-mana Search for 2 basics or Towns card to kind of ramp into these diamond weapons, and I had a main deck Nature's Claim. The first one I Nature's Claimed to be mana efficient. I think I hadn't drawn Zidane either, and then he played another, and I had Zidane. And he didn't die immediately, but this 8-power lifelink swing kind of just meant the rest of the game he couldn't afford to attack me because of such a huge life total discrepancy. And that was the game.
Yeah, the card's quite strong. It also makes a treasure on top of all the other things it does.
That's also kind of nice with my Gilgamesh especially, and Gladiolus, because the treasure means you could play Gladiolus and then play your land. And that was the only game I drew Genova, so it ended up being a game I was pretty far ahead in as well. Next round, I was against James.
I was hoping you played Chapin.
Yeah. I checked later. Chapin lost for 3-0 in this pod to somebody that I didn't play against. James was white-green, kind of landfally aggro, go wide type stuff. And game 1, I just drew a lot better than him. He got pretty flooded. Game 2, he had Grand Pulse Ochu and Defend the Fangbearer and is poisoning me. And then I kind of stabilize, but then he gets Summon Fat Chocobo and gets 2 equipments on Fang to get it to 4 power, and I only have 3 creatures, so I can't survive the Death Touch Trample interaction when I was at 8 poison.
Isn't it funny how that card is surprisingly threatening at dealing poison damage?
Yeah, with Grand Pulse Ochu at common, that helps a lot. I had a draft on Arena where I had turn 1 Cecil into turn 2 Finn, and my opponent conceded instantly.
Nice. Cowards.
Yeah, but yeah, definitely...
But even just on its own sometimes, because a 1/3 death touch, the best way to answer that theoretically would just be to ignore it and let it hit you.
Yep.
But you can't really do that
can't.
with that card. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was in March of the Machine on the bonus sheet as well, and I don't know if there's a lot of death touch synergies, but I agree, even without other death touch synergies, that stat line combined with something potent when it attacks is really strong, and especially if you like get it increased power and toughness or things like that, because then they kind of have to block and trade it, but then if you get like a death touch creature with multiple power and high toughness, then that is kind of asking them to double block it potentially, and that's just not a good option for them either.
Yeah, so for people who haven't played with it, it looks a bit unassuming, but it's actually kind of a premium card.
Yeah, in Outlaws of Thunder Junction there was like a card called Servant of the Stinger, I think, that was also, it was a 1 and a black 1/3 death touch, and when it hit your opponent, if you had already committed a crime this turn, you could sack it to Demonic Tutor. Very similar.
Yeah.
Just that stat line combined with some kind of combat trigger. Yeah, like you said, it's just puts your opponent in kind of a no-win situation often.
So I just want to mention, since you brought up Chapin, that I've always liked Chapin, and I thought it was cool that both him and TGO came back to play this Pro Tour. I will call TGO a coward for playing blue-white Omniscience, because Chapin brought Dark Confidants to Standard.
Yeah, and I made a joke too. I played against Bob in round 4, and then in round 5 I played against that guy Michael playing with Dark Confidants, and I said I've played against Bob every round.
Did you say that to him, or you said it to?
No, because in the other order.
Okay. Yeah, I would be reluctant to make a joke towards him, because I feel like almost all of his opponents would be like, "Oh, did you come?" Because it's like the first Pro Tour he's played in a while, I think. So
yeah,
you would just assume he came to play Dark Confidant, and he didn't. Yeah.
Probably came for the Cloud promo.
Oh yeah, I wish I had a Cloud promo.
I didn't talk to Paulo Vitor Damadores this weekend, but I overheard him talking to multiple people, and almost the same story each time he was at this event, and the only reason he was at this event is because of that promo.
Oh my. Hall of Famers are like, yeah, sure. Well, I guess it's kind of it's like free travel.
It's a huge bonus to the floor of prize money,
It is. That's going to be cool. I bet, maybe not for the regular PTs, but maybe Universes Beyond, you can expect to have a higher floor.
That's more stuff like that. And certainly I wish that the Pro Tour promo, like unlike, we also got the Karn Liberated, but I certainly just wished each PT had its own promo. These things cost Wizards hardly any money, and they could even cut their prize money and include more stuff like this, and I think it would be a win-win.
That is true. I will caution, I kind of follow a lot of other card games just tangentially, and a lot of them have heavy promo distribution like this, and but a lot of them have not good price support outside of that. So they have, people complained about that.
Yeah.
So Magic is lucky to have at least probably the best prize support.
I agree. I mean, I'm glad that there is also cash prizes. I just kind of meant, if instead of a $500,000 Pro Tour, it was a $400,000 Pro Tour, and Wizards spent $100 printing cards, they could easily be worth more than $100,000 in combination,
Yeah, I agree. That seems like kind of win-win. Like, and it's cool. I haven't been playing PT since they've been giving out promos. To me, it's just a cool idea.
Yeah.
Even if they're not worth that much.
Yeah, and even
definitely
this
adds a lot of value.
is worth a couple $100. It's not nothing, It's pretty nice.
Yeah.
Anyways, so yeah, the third round of draft against James, game of 3, green-white aggro. Kind of a board stally situation. I had just played Renault Hardley. I had the UFO in play for a bit, but 4 of my towns and the 5th one was known in my hand. It's a situation I was talking about previously, where they didn't really want to trade off with this UFO, knowing that I could just pick it back up with a Landau sandbagging. And we had traded off a lot of creatures this game. And then at some point, I also notably have Coral the Tapper in play. And at some point, they kind of, I don't know if they drew, like maybe it was an equipment they could play and use, but it must not have been that. But they just kind of math out their combat. And I'm not dead or anything, but they're making sure they're not dead on the swing back to the combination of like Renoa targeting my UFO because I was flying and me activating the UFO. And they properly count that I have 4 creatures with Renoa and that I have 5 towns with the UFO. And they even, I feel like they even kind of said, well, maybe you draw another town and, you like end of turn, tap the UFO, put the town in your hand into play, untap, draw another town, or you untap, draw another creature. So that's like +1 because my last card in hand was only this town. So they're even like accounting for all this. And then they go to combat and they decide they're not dead on the swing back. And I hadn't really been doing any counting yet because, I'm not the one making decisions here. and I count out their combat. I'm at like 16. They're attacking me for 13. They have no cards in hand, no tricks on board. I have this tapper that I didn't use in combat because I felt pretty safe, and I felt like waiting till end of turn to tap stuff would make life more difficult for them. And they left back 2 blockers, and then I start doing my counting, and they're at 13, and I see if I tap one of their 2 blockers and attack with everything next turn and pump my UFO that they're going to take 13 damage. And so I take 13 and I win.
Tragic.
Yeah. So they just miscounted multiple times. I didn't go as fast as that for me either. I count 13 the first go, but I still triple checked that I was going to win the game before deciding no blocks.
That's the kind of thing that would make me real nervous. I'd be like, what the hell am I missing? If they just did this, I've got to be missing something.
Yeah, exactly. Very fortunate for me. So now I'm 6-5. Feeling pretty good about that. I'm really happy and proud of myself to 5-1's draft. That's tied with my best performances. I think I've only have one other time I've done that, which was Guild of Ravnica. Next round's back to standard. I get paired against Matt Sperling. He's playing the CFB prowess list, which, as I mentioned before, has Swift Spears. It has 1 VV main, 1 in the sideboard. Everything else is pretty normal prowessy stuff. I win game 1 pretty normally with, I think, you get the Omni in your graveyard and you discard. I think his list might have not even had a Spell Pierce, but he has Torch. I think all of my game 1s against Omniscience have this interesting feature, whether they have Spell Pierce or not, where like I maybe have the option to turn 4 combo, but I don't have a Scroll Shift or second Omniscience, so I don't feel like I would actually win. Like I would just get my 1/1 into play and cast a spell and my opponent would kill it in response or bounce it because they were passing with mana. But I also feel comfortable between my lockdown and other things going on that I can just win the game playing it slower. And like I think multiple games, specifically against the multiple lists I played without a Spell Pierce main deck, they end up getting locked down, having no recovery to it, or maybe 2 lockdowns, and then they have no follow-up. And then I end up casting Abuelos for X=2 to make a 3/3 Omniscience, and they don't have any bargain fodder. So it limits their outs severely to only bouncing it. But also I think by then maybe I just drew better and drew more gas to be able to play in response to things and try to find a Scroll Shift or have it. From there, game 2 was kind of interesting because he has like his first VV that gets answered, and then he has a second one that I'm like bouncing, and I have a Cavern on Dragon. So I'm playing these River Regents, and there comes a turn where Sperling replays his second copy of VV, and he casts a spell, and I respond with a Get Lost, and he casts 2 more instants in response, and I was at 4 life to start that turn, so he ends up getting me to 1 life that turn. And then I untap and I win. And he had mentioned he had a Disdainful Stroke the entire time, and I'd cast 2 uncounterable dragons that game with him having VV in play, and he said maybe I should have just stroked one of your dragons to deal 1 damage.
Boy.
Yeah. So
funny matchup.
Yeah, win that one. Next round, Carl Serap, really accomplished player as well. I've played against him before, known as Terabad on Magic Online. Omnimere again. He's on Team Handshake. He's got their list. This is probably one of the worst mistakes I've ever made in a Magic tournament in general. Certainly the Pro Tour. I am using Philology Archaeologist and flickering it to dig for gas in the early turns, and I mill both my Oracle of Tragedies and 2 of my Remembering River Regents. This means I have no ability to shuffle things back into my deck. I can still loop the other 2 regents in my deck, but I pretty much just have access. I already used a Spell Pierce against him at some point, and I only have access to like 1 Confounding Riddle to stop him from winning, and I have to like lethal them over multiple turns with my dragons in order to win this game. I find the Riddle pretty early when I do combo him, and find the Riddle pretty early into just drawing things from my deck, but I for some reason just get greedier, and I'm looking for things like Scroll Shift Interact, and I am just completely spacing the fact that he has a Blast Zone and I have a temporary lockdown that has 2 of my own Dragon Storms and a Philology Archaeologist under it, and I get to myself to exactly 7 cards in my library without even thinking about it at all, thinking that's plenty of cards to lethal him with my 2 dragons, and he just end of turn takes up his Blast Zone and untaps and kills my lockdown and attacks me.
This is not what I was expecting when I heard that you made the worst play ever.
I don't know. It felt like a game I was basically 99% to win, and I gave my opponent like they're only out to win.
Sure. But this is like a pretty narrow win that your opponent found, kind of corner case.
Yeah, I just think my type of, like, I'm pretty good at covering these cases, and I think it just comes from like a lack of really thinking about it beforehand, which I'm usually pretty good at doing.
Okay. I mean, I've done things like not play my second land on turn 2 after playing a discard spell.
Sure.
Because I was so distracted.
But that, I think, is maybe giving, I went from 99% to 0%. That's a huge, like, misplay, not playing your land. You go from, like, 50% to 10% or something, like.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know.
I accept. I just didn't expect it.
Yeah. Game 2, I managed to get my combo off, but not with a lot of gas in my hand. I think I only have like a Dragon Storm and I miss, and then he ends up killing me on his turn. So 0-2 there, now 0-3 in Omniscient Smears.
Rough.
Round 14 against Jeff Pica on Prowess. Win game 1, same way I keep beating Prowess in game 1. They're just, I think, not that well equipped to actually beat you in game 1. They're mostly focused on their mirror matches and things like that. They just kind of have to kill you fast and hope you don't have your combo and or lockdown a lot of the time. Game 2, I think I went kind of full control but didn't want to. In hindsight, I kind of learned, I think specifically when I'm on the draw, the combo-y plan might be a little bit better. Because things like No More Lies are a little bit weaker on the draw, but a lot stronger on the play. Game 3, I'm still full control, but I feel better about it when I'm on the play. And a really interesting thing happens on Jeff's turn 4, where he has 3 lands in play, no creatures in play. I think I probably answered them or something with a lockdown, and he plays a stock up, and he leans back in his chair and takes the 5 cards from the stock up, and they touch the other 6 cards in his hand. And he yells some profanity, and we call a judge. And, I already know probably what's going to happen here. But the judge comes and is processing it because it's a lot of extra cards compared to normal here. This is 11 total cards instead of like 1. It's 5 cards going from one zone to another instead of like 1. And so the judge talks to some other judges to make sure this is what's going to happen. And they ask me, and I demonstrate with some tokens what I saw from his perspective. Like the cards in his hands did touch. Like, yeah, I guess if you told me I'm only allowed to kind of trust what my eyes saw, then yeah, I don't think he mixed around the cards in his hands. But, I'm not a sleight of hands genius, and I don't know what could have happened. So if you're going to ask me if I'm 100% sure what happened, I'm going to say no. Also, to some extent, my opponent made this error themselves, so I feel some sort of penalty is at hands that's kind of more normal. He appeals to the head judge, not because he thinks the judge is wrong, and I know I haven't gotten to the ruling yet, I will, but because, it's a pretty devastating ruling, so you might as well make sure it's 100% accurate. I agreed with the appeal. I would appeal in his spot too, just to make sure everyone's on the same page. Anyways, the results of this is I get to see all 11 cards in Jeff's hands and stock up and decide which 6 are his hand and which 5 are his stock up.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Is that how you thought it'd be?
Yes, that's exactly what I thought would happen.
Okay.
And I knew before I even saw his hand, because he told me the reason he kind of sighed and leaned back in his chair is because these are 11 spells and he's going to miss his land drop and discard the hand size. So
good old stock up terrible card. Why did we play that?
Yeah. And what's funny is I'm this full control Omni list, and the game's gonna go forever. And it's a prowess deck that's pretty redundant. And I already kind of have this feeling before I even look at these cards, this is hardly gonna matter. What matters most is I know what the cards are, but like the specifics of what's his hand and what's his stock up, because the fact that he gets to pick 2 of them, like ultimately I get to like try to decide what I think are the 9th, 8th, and 7th best spells in the hand, or sorry, I guess the 11th. Yeah, like the last 3 worst cards in that pile.
Yeah, he's always getting the best ones, and then some redundant cards. So it's like whatever.
I put he had like 3 bounce spells and a Roaring Furnace that I put into his hands to make a game plan kind of sculpt around not sticking my creatures so fast, or making sure I was stabilized so the bounce spells were a lot lessened. This game goes very long and involves top decks needed on my ends, to be honest, but I do win it with like the White Overlord eventually grinding through some things.
I will say I've already played some games where I'm stocking up for a land and just assuming I'm going to get a land of some type, but you don't hit any. It's the worst feeling in the world.
Yeah. pretty unlucky compared to a lot. People do that with a lot of other things. I've seen a lot with expressive iteration is one I've even scolded people for is casting iteration on turn 3 when their 2-mana play on turn 2 is totally fine and acceptable for the game.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely. I don't think he was too upset about it because I think he also recognized that wasn't a huge impact on the game. Also, I would say, even if I'm 99% sure that those cards did not get switched around in his hand, I'm just never going to be 100% sure, and it's best to protect myself. And I didn't do anything wrong. And also, I knew it would be really, really funny. So I kind of wanted to see it happen.
Yeah, it seems fine.
Yeah.
I mean, it is the sort of thing that if you were going to cheat, I can't imagine that's what you would do.
Yeah. Well, it's also like a matter of him trusting himself, right? Like, what if he kind of pulled his hands into him and didn't even realize?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure it was a mistake, but...
So, round 15, I get paired against Simon Nielsen, kind of the reigning champion of he's not world champion, but he won Pro Tour MH3. He was player of the year. He's rank 1 on ELO Project, which very important to me. It's what I have my eyes on in this match because my current 8-6 record, I'm really thinking I want to recover some ELO from this event, and it's no better chance than the rank 1 ELO person. He's playing Golgari Roots, which is pretty funny because my team submitted this Jund Roots deck, and I randomly have a decent amount of experience in this matchup.
Nice.
Yeah, so game 1, I lose the die roll, and I keep a hand that I think has Abuelos and Omniscience in it, but not a way to discard the Omniscience. But I think it had like River Regent also, and it's Surveil land. And I know from his perspective in the matchup, he's going to care about Haywire Mighting my lockdowns, which he has 4 copies of Haywire Might in his main deck, which is more than my team played, and I kind of thought our team should have played more. And he also has 2 copies of Scavenging Ooze in his main deck. So his deck is actually kind of a grindy deck. Even though Roots does have these really powerful explosive turns, they are kind of just a mid-range deck working on like an axis of recursion, so they're pretty hard to interact with. And he's kind of playing a Hate Bears angle against Omniscience, where he's using Haywire Might and Scavenging Ooze to prevent himself from losing effectively. I, turn 1, play Meticulous Archive on the draw, and I Surveil Omniscience to my graveyard, which fixes many of the problems with my hand. And Simon spends his first 4 turns digging aggressively for his Scavenging Ooze, not finding it, and losing to turn 4 Omniscience. But I think that was actually pretty lucky, because he did a lot of digging. He played pretty much a 2-mana spell that dug 4 or more cards deep, or even did more than that all of his turns, except for the first turn.
This green-black deck did pretty good at the Pro Tour. I'm looking at the win rate. Maybe not your guys' Jund didn't?
Yeah, to be fair, the players playing the green-black Roots deck are some of the best players in the world.
Yeah.
So that win rate they had might have been their actually expected win rate for those players in this tournament.
Fair. It's always hard to parse that sort of thing out.
Yeah. Anyways, so game 2, this is where my experience shines in the matchup, because when I first practiced against our team's Jund Roots deck, I would not have thought Overlord of the Mistmoors was really what the games were about, or even counterspells to that matter. But what I've kind of learned is you both just end up interacting with each other a lot. You're both trying to prevent the other person from doing kind of their main thing here. And counterspells are actually pretty effective against the Roots deck because they're kind of wanting a lot of pieces to come together. And Overlord of the Mistmoors, not so much to scroll shift it, because that could be answered by Mites, but more that 2/2/1 flying is like actually pretty annoying for them.
That makes sense.
I think
they're mostly a ground game kind of blocker situation, right?
Yeah, they don't actually like pressure you that well through like Archaeologist, or the fact that a lot of the times you like lock down their stuff and they free up their lockdowns. And it's kind of nice because they don't have like a lot of they have some Dredger's Insights, but like when you lock down them, it's more just that like they're really well equipped to kill the lockdown, but they don't like punish you when that happens. They don't have like these ETBs. So it kind of works out pretty nicely. And it's also, I guess, this type of game is Omniscience that you get to play sometimes where I'm not choosing the Overlords over my combo. Like I think I boarded out 1 Abuelos and 1 Omniscience. Like my deck just has both things going on. So I know Simon has like a turn 1 Mana Dork, and then 2 more Mana Dorks on turn 2. And then on turn 3, into my 2 open mana, he decides to jam a hard cast Overlord of the Baelmerk. I do not have No More Lies. He returns a Skyfisher Spider, the 4-drop, but then he misses his 3rd land drop and passes. And I have end of turn, get lost to the Overlord, untap, play Lockdown, hit his 3 mana dorks and the maps. So now he's back down to 2 mana. I think following turns, I get like Omniscience to my graveyard. I don't have Abuelos. He plays an Ooze. I think maybe even as soon as I get the Omniscience to my graveyard anyways. And the play that I seemed like he was pretty impressed by is eventually on like 3 lands in play, he casts a Haywire Might, and I have a No More Lies for it. And I also had impended the Blue Overlord. That's part of how I got the Omniscience in my graveyard. So I kind of have this looming pressure of the Blue Overlord. I answered his Haywire Might, and it's exiled, so he can't return it. He doesn't free up his mana dorks with the Lockdown. Eventually, I scroll shift my Lockdown to get his Ooze and his Roots, and I untap, and I think it's on turn 7, I cast the White Overlord for all 7 mana. And my Blue Overlord comes off its impend, and from there, he's kind of just dead.
Nice. It's a pretty cool function of the Azorius deck. Is the Blue Overlord common in that deck?
Yeah, it's pretty normal nowadays, and it plays out really well. That's a card I'm really impressed by, and in fact, it also has a slight scroll shift synergy. But I think if the deck didn't have scroll shift, this might matter post rotation because scroll shift is leaving standard. With rotation, I think the Blue Overlord really has a home in that deck because it just kind of lines up well with even like the River Regent plan. On turn 3, if you impend it, then it actually unlocks on the end step of your turn 6. So you can really turn corners with like a turn 6 Regent from there, and then having 11 power flying. If you're playing a more controlling game. And then also as you're comboing off, like a card that's kind of comparing its slots to a stock up, which obviously digs deeper than that card. But this card helps you set up your combo because it's a discard outlet. And with Afara's Dispersal and Meringue River Regent being able to bounce it, I actually want to say it might make you more likely to actually combo and not fizzle.
Yeah, and I mean, scroll shift's got to be a huge deal for it too, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of game 1s or whatever, the 5/3 is pretty answerable. Like, it could just get torched, so it's more just like a post-board like overlap, I guess, that it's nice that it plays really well into both your game plans. Definitely pretty impressed by the card, though.
I know I'm pretty bad about all these tangents, but I loved all the Overlords when that set came out. I thought they're cool, and I thought the blue one was probably one of the better ones, and it was extremely like cheap, and so I actually spec'd on it. I bought like 50 of them.
Oh, nice.
And then no one really played with it, but yet somehow they still went up a couple dollars.
Yeah.
So I sold most of them just to get out of it. It's mostly break even. But I still have some, like the fancy Japanese ones I have. They were really cheap, but
yeah, I love those Japanese arts, but they only come in foil, which I kind of refuse to play with nowadays.
But yeah, curling or
yeah,
I feel like they've been better about that lately. Those cards, but maybe not.
Yeah, I don't really
feel that.
Bother.
Yeah, it's definitely like, especially when you're playing competitive tournaments, it's like a risk that's not worth taking, I would say.
So anyways, 16 or around 16, I play against Adam Edelson. He's a former teammate of mine. Team Heavy Play Rampant Growth was started at Pro Tour MH3. I was on that team. He's a super nice guy. Immediately, we are walking together to the table. He's on Is It Prowess, and immediately we both kind of ask each other, like, what's this match mean to you? And we both discovered that we went 10-6 at the previous Pro Tour, and we're at exactly like equal footing here. Which is that if we win this match, it's probably not even enough for Worlds. So it's just one more match towards Worlds. And we both already locked up the first invite of Pro Tour Richmond in 2026 by getting 9 wins at this event. So that's kind of refreshing that, we're playing for equal stakes. It's probably just ultimately worth 1 win towards Worlds and maybe $500 to $1,000. Which,
you don't
is
have to
a lot.
knock each other out of the next PT or something.
Yeah, neither of us are dream crushing each other. It's an exactly equal stance. This time, he's on Prowess, similar list to a lot of others. He's got some of the This Town Thundertrap stuff. I win game 1 the same way I always win, but this time, the way these kind of grindier post-board games play out, he comes out on top on both of them, and he beats me.
Okay. So you finish...
I finished 9-7, which is the threshold that I needed to hit 39 AMPs, which for those of you who maybe didn't listen to the last Badcast or don't remember, 39 AMPs across 3 Pro Tours is enough for an invite. I was already qualified for Atlanta via the system before, but now because my 2 previous Pro Tours equal 39 AMPs, I'm now qualified for the first Pro Tour of 2026, which is in Richmond.
It's hard to be disappointed with that, I would say.
Yeah.
Obviously, if someone had told you you're going to go 5-1 in draft and then your record is going to be 9-7, you'd be like, what the heck? But
yeah,
so it goes.
But yeah, sitting here now, I'm pretty happy with it. I think, so I have this spreadsheet that I sent you a link of about the Worlds race to some degree. It has a list of all the people who are not currently qualified for Worlds via top 8ing or getting 12 wins of the Pro Tour or, finishing first or second at an RC or whatever the threshold was for them, and their AMPs. And right now I sit in a big tie that goes between 24th and 43rd place with people that have 39 AMPs, which I guess is not what I expected. I expected maybe less people. The Pro Tour is a little bit bigger. So before I saw the sheet, I would have guessed I needed 5 wins at the next Pro Tour. Now I'm feeling like maybe 6, but it's really hard to know.
That's a pretty good spot to be in either way. 6 is not a ton. I mean, especially just based on your average record, right? So
yeah, 6 is certainly something I've achieved almost all Pro Tours I've played, so that's nice. And then I guess only caveat here is last year, everybody who had the same AMPs as the person in 32nd place got this invite to Worlds. I have not received any confirmation that will be the case this year, but also nothing saying it wouldn't be the case. So I'm not sure, kind of assuming it's going to be the case because it's kind of completely arbitrary. I can't think of even a reasonable tiebreaker when it's, a dozen people or whatever too. Like, it's just kind of ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad the Pro Tour went well for you in that regard then.
Yeah.
I was definitely rooting for as good as you could do, but honestly, I'm sure, if someone offered you 9-7 before you went in, you probably would take it, right?
Yeah, I think so. Specifically, I'm pretty happy about the draft. I felt like I 5-1s. I think even though my second deck, it makes sense to 2-1 with it, I really felt like it's a deck that could have 3-0'd given how my matches played out, and like I felt like I got the unluckiest I did in that draft in the round I lost, and that happened in draft, so I'm not that worried about it. But
doing your best to eliminate hindsight bias, which is obviously difficult to eliminate completely. Do you like your deck choice? Did you think?
So there's an interesting dynamic here because a lot of my team played Jund Roots, which was not a very good deck. And I was testing remotely, so I didn't have a lot of influence over their deck choice. But some people on my team played an Is It Prowess list with Wild Ride. And if you watched the Pro Tour and you heard I was on Flex Diamond, you might have realized that deck made the finals of the Pro Tour. So I was on a team with what might have been one of the best Prowess lists in the tournament. But I got that list when I woke up Tuesday morning, just basically saying they really liked it. But, I didn't see any of the games play out. I'd never seen any games with Wild Ride. And I just felt pretty happy just playing Omniscience. I knew, honestly, I could have told you going into the tournament that I thought Omniscience would have a 50% win rate, and I was kind of okay with that.
Okay.
And it actually did better than that.
Yeah.
But, just I didn't want to gamble, I guess is how I'd put it. I felt like I was pretty good at draft nowadays and pretty good at playing my constructed decks nowadays. And I think I actually kind of underperformed on my play and constructed this tournament. There's at least 2 rounds I think I could have won if I played better. That doesn't mean I magically have 11 wins instead because I'd have different opponents all over the place. But, it's...
Yeah. So kind of before we get into the ban talk, I'm looking at I imagine this is probably where you got your data too for this. I'm looking at Frank Karsten just did a nice chart for the win rates for Final Fantasy.
Yeah.
Considering how the consensus of how good Is It Prowess is, I think it performed a little bit below average what people would expect, especially since it put 4 in the top 8. Is that just because Mono Red did so well, basically, or
things like Mono Red and the format's completely warped around it, right? Like, it's I think 49% for a deck that's 40% of the field is actually a great win rate. It's
because you have to account for mirror matches and
the
lower quality player playing it since it's so popular.
The mirror matches aren't impacting like the percent that Carson's pulling data from. I assume these are non-mirror win percentages because otherwise it doesn't really change anything. But the point being is that like these prowess players to some degree are gunning for each other. And I think Dragecatcher is a great example of a card that is mostly just for mirrors and mono red. And it's not really the threat that would be best in other matchups. I I think like fairly obviously when you play these games. Um, the extra toughness and the vigilance are really like the key selling points of that card, and that's what matters in a lot of the mirrors and mono red matchups.
The only part of the top 8 I watched, because I didn't find it very interesting, was the finals. I watched a bit of it,
Yeah,
and I thought it was funny that in the last game, what was his name? Ian Robb.
Yep.
He was dying with basically draft commons in his hand. He had like Wild Ride.
Yeah,
and
he took Wild Rider with Torch Tower regretfully in one of his sleight of hands too, trying to race that game. On a side note, Ian Robb top 8'd the last Pro Tour as well, and those are actually his first 2 Pro Tours.
I heard that. Yeah, it's pretty absurd.
One of very few people to have ever done that. Yuki Ichikawa comes to mind, and I'm going to guess anyone else who has done that feat, probably that happens before like the year 2000 even. He comes from competitive Pokemon, though he's been playing Magic for a long time. I saw in the graphic it said 2008, so it's not like he's new to Magic. But it's just kind of funny story about him that people know him from. He, last August, I believe, made top 4 of the Pokemon World Championships and got a match loss for doing an inappropriate gesture on camera.
He was that guy.
Yeah.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah, he still plays Pokemon too. He actually really enjoys
That's funny because the controversy about that was that he was like very clearly going to win
right
that match, and then he did that, which was silly that he was disqualified for that, but
yeah. Pokemon rules are definitely a lot stricter than Magic rules. I don't know if that specific rule that he got a match loss over he's happy about, but he seems to be pretty happy overall talking to him about that Pokemon rules are stricter. He kind of enjoys that you get game losses for doing things that look like cheating more often and stuff like that. But yeah, he honestly was also perhaps just the MVP of our testing team. He seems like he's a really strong player, and he posts a lot about his thoughts and testing things, and he drafted a lot. Stuff like that. He went 6-0 in draft, which I think is really impressive for being new to the Pro Tour as well.
It is. Card game connoisseur, huh?
Yeah.
And I've played both Magic and Pokemon, and I will say there are wildly different games, and it's very difficult to transfer the skills between the two.
But yeah, like I said, it's less of a transfer, right? Like he's played Magic for, it seems like, almost his entire life, like many people on the Pro Tour.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, so we've got a event, this whole standard format, even before Steel Cutter came out, it's been sort of dominated by either kind of these polar end things, either red decks or up the beanstalk decks. With prowess, with Steel Cutter coming out and the rise of prowess, beanstalk is definitely less popular than it used to be, although I would still argue that it sort of provides a polar end to the format where it's difficult to play more mid-range decks against things that would be good against mono red, for example.
It got 9th at the Pro Tour in the hands of Edgar Malguilles, though I saw he did 6-0 draft, so that was a 6-4 finish, but that's, pretty respectable. Also, when you 6-0 draft, you're playing against stronger opponents and constructed later. So
yeah, so it's definitely still a real thing. And of course, Up the Beanstalk's banned in Modern. This brings me to talking about the ban discussion on I guess
Monday.
Next Monday.
Yep.
At first, I'll ask what you expect to happen, and then you could tell me what you think should happen.
Okay. So what I expect to happen is Corey Steel Cutter is going to get banned. And then a card from Mono Red is going to get banned. My guess is either Monstrous Rage or Heartfire Hero. Maybe something like Manifold Mouse. I don't think multiple cards from Mono Red will get banned. I think it'll be one of those two categories, either Monstrous Rage or one of the mice. I'm probably not Challenger. Probably one of the two I listed, just because Challenger has some kind of, especially with Steel Cutter getting banned, they seem like they kind of like these prowess decks maybe existing in this format, and that's a prowess creature that maybe could be one people consider. And then I would not be surprised, I guess, if they actually banned Up the Beanstalk for like other reasons. And they kind of have this incentive to kind of pre-rotate things sometimes, I guess, because, they change rotation to 3 years instead of 2. So Monstrous Rage and Up the Beanstalk especially are cards that have been in Standard for almost a normal amount of time that cards used to be in Standard, and now they're going to be around for another year. So those having targets on their head don't make like... They kind of make sense to me. And then the other one is maybe Omniscience, because it's not a card that, it's not a deck that's very fun to play against. Some pieces of that deck are rotating, but like Abuelo's Omniscience, Rolling Dragonstorm Meringue River Regents art. And then Omniscience is from Foundations, which means it'll be in standard for 5 years. So that's what would not surprise me. And I don't think that's a bad, like, what they should do list. I guess to be more specific, I would prefer actually maybe to leave Monstrous Rage in standard and ban, I guess Manifold Mouse. I don't know. I guess Heartfire Hero. It's tough.
Yeah, I agree. It's tough. So obviously, I have no idea what they'll do. My guess is that they would probably ban. They're going to lean towards banning Monstrous Rage and not even Steel Cutter. And that's not what I think they should do. But the reason I think I mean, Steel Cutter's new, right? It's very new, and there's been this sort of buzz about Monstrous Rage being too good for a while, and it's also the card that's in both of the decks, and it's in, there's like 32 copies in the top 8s and things like that. So I think it's an easy villain, although I agree Monstrous Rage to me is not a card you should be banning. I think if you want to ban a deck from the mice deck, it should be like Heartfire Hero probably.
Yeah, probably that one.
To be honest, if I got to choose, I would probably ban Up the Beanstalk and Corey Steelcutter and nothing else. But
interesting. I just feel like you have to hit the mice deck given kind of the aftermath of going from it being kind of dominated in Aether Drift until Steelcutter was printed. I also would say, having played with Prowess a lot, and I knew this going into the Pro Tour, I think Steelcutter is kind of a cut above all other cards in Standard. It's just,
I could
think
see that
there might be a level of kind of, it feels like a design mistake. It's just too powerful when you play with it against it. It really just feels like a Monastery Mentor that costs 1 less mana and is hard to kill. Like it's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah. And then it has Trample and Haste.
Yeah,
it's just everything about it is so pushed.
Yeah.
The equip cost is even kind of cheap. It definitely feels like a card that could easily have just been in a Modern Master set.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm hoping they ban that. I think it would open up a lot. Although the reason I don't think it's super necessary to ban the mice cards, because I'm pretty sure if Up the Beanstalk decks weren't so good that you could build mid-range and control decks that could beat Mono Red pretty easily.
Well, it's worth noting that Cut Down and Go for the Throat are rotating. So,
okay.
And Temporary Lockdown. So
like at this first...
On August 1st, those will rotate with Edge of Eternities.
Yeah. But presumably they're going to print,
other things.
Some good cheap removal, yeah.
And then Beanstalk will lose out on Leyline Binding, but it'll still have the Overlords. And Zer's going to rotate too. So I'm sure
Beanstalk plus Overlord is just...
There's still going to be a Beanstalk plus Overlord deck that's very good, maybe even a unit deck, but it's going to be not completely different, but it's going to lose a lot of the shell that it had.
Yeah, that's just the sort. It's just so uninteresting because it's like,
I agree.
It's so easy to be the most inevitability deck or card advantage deck with that combination.
I think there's another card in Standard actually that is really, really powerful and not talked about that much, and that's Proph's Eidetic Memory.
Okay.
And it kind of has the same problem that Up the Beanstalk has and Cutter.
Yeah.
Where like they all get value immediately. I mean, I know you have to cast a second spell for Cutter, but the point being is like they're extremely hard to interact with profitably because
2 mana non-creature permanents. Like you have to have duress on the
or spell pierce
if they're on the play or something ridiculous like that. Yeah.
And it's just a card that gives a lot of value. It's a little bit more answerable, but it still draws a card when it enters. So typically the plan against it is to like kill all your opponent's creatures the whole game. And Paulo played a Is It Cauldron deck. He got feature matched. It looked pretty impressive, and nothing we've talked about getting banned is in that deck. So I wouldn't be surprised if it would be a pretty big front runner in the new Standard format if bans we're talking about happened. Using VV Cauldron, but not like anything that weird. Not trying to combo off of VV Cauldron. Just the fact that if you put a VV under the Cauldron, put a counter on your guy, you can make like 4 mana immediately. Stuff like that with Tursa and Proph's Eidetic Memory.
I think he went 9-1.
He went 8-2. I checked. I thought
8-2. Okay.
But yeah, pretty impressive record. Seemed like the deck was doing a lot of powerful things. Winter Night Story is really glue for that whole deck, giving you lots of mana sink and draws and discard outlets. It's kind of just the perfect card there.
Yeah, I'd be pretty okay with just saying 2-mana non-creature perma has generate value right away. They were a mistake. We should have learned with Bitter Blossom years ago, but we'll correct it right now.
Yeah,
Pretty
I
happy
doubt
with
they'd
that.
ever touch profs, but that is certainly like if they banned the 4 categories of cards I'm talking about, that would be high on my list of most powerful cards in Standard.
Yeah. And maybe they should ban omniscience. I just think it's kind of interesting to have a deck like that in Standard. It's pretty unique.
Yeah.
And it's not that hard to hate out, at least compared to other things.
Yeah, it's interesting as they get more jukes, though. The hate kind of mini game is kind of annoying, I think, sometimes.
Yeah. What are the odds they just don't ban anything in Standard?
Oh, extremely
like
low.
last time?
I think
Extremely low? Okay. I mean, that's what they did last time, and it seemed bad then, too.
So, yeah, you mean when people were asking about Rage and Up the Beanstalk?
Yeah.
The key difference, I think, here is the point I made about rotation and the kind of timing of it. Because they mentioned, this was when they banned, like, Fable the Mirrorbreaker, Invoke Despair, and Reckoner Bankbuster. They did exactly kind of what I was describing with what I want them to kind of do with Wilds of Eldraine broken cards, is that these are cards that should normally be rotating, and I think people are just kind of sick of them. They've just been dominant for basically over 2 years now, or coming up on 2 years. Now they're at risk of being dominant for a 3rd year.
Yeah. I'm going to guess you probably don't like that change to Standard overall, where it's a 3-year Standard now. It definitely has changed things a lot. It feels like it's made the... I mean, it's hard to tell a little bit because power creep is always something you have to think about, but it definitely seems like it's raised the power level of Standard by quite a bit.
Yeah, it definitely has. But it's hard to tell because, like, the Prowess deck almost has no cards rotating, and except for the mana base. Even that's only Shivan Reef. So it's just maybe just more so power creep that's been causing that. What I actually don't like is usually a lot of these new sets feel pretty low impact given the size of Standard.
Oh yeah, it's hugely disappointing that Final Fantasy barely made an impact at all.
Yeah, it was the winning lethal spell, the self-destruct.
Okay, well.
When you get on board and weren't going to win.
Yeah, but self-destruct is like
It's just a fling.
100th most interesting card in the set. So
Eevee's up there on interesting cards at least.
it is. I agree. A little rough that it's in the best deck. It's
Yeah.
like the only deck that
But
got
like the
something.
Cauldron deck would be a sweet deck that kind of showcases VV. And
Yeah, it would be. Do you... Are there any other formats you want to touch with the ban list? I mean, I've played Pioneer a decent amount. That format definitely needs a shakeup too, but I'm not prepared really to say what I think they should do, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. That's probably next on the list of formats they really need to look at. It seems almost very similar that Mono Red and Is It Phoenix are kind of the dominant decks of that format, but the other kind of decks are so powerful sometimes that it doesn't always feel that way. Like it feels a little bit closer to Modern, where like you could play a deck that people would tell you is the 10th best deck and win your tournament, and it's not like weird that you won the tournament.
Yeah, Pioneer, it doesn't feel like a very fun format most of the time when I play it, but it's hard for me to articulate why. So yeah. I'm not really sure what they should do. What about Modern? Do you think there's anything pressing in Modern or any unbans you'd like to see?
The next Pro Tour is Modern. I haven't noticed anything that I feel like they should ban in Modern. I'm sure like after a Pro Tour, those things are going to be much more likely to reveal themselves. That's just kind of how it goes.
Yeah.
But it seems like, especially with Modern not being an arena format, the arena championships aren't going to reveal it either. Yeah, I don't really think they're going to touch Modern. Things have looked like they're kind of all over the place. A pretty nice, diverse thing. The Boros Energy deck is still really popular, but it seems like people aren't really complaining about it. It just seems like a deck people like to play.
Yeah, it seems healthy from looking on the outside.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Legacy. I know nothing about Legacy. They can do whatever they want.
Legacy and Vintage are fake formats that I don't really pay attention to at all.
Basically, they're more casual than Commander these days.
Not quite that, but yeah.
Well, in the sense of like how much people play them.
Yeah, that's fair.
I guess, Commander's the most popular thing, but you know what I mean. Well, I think that covers it. One of our longer episodes, but I don't know. I always find these kind of episodes interesting. So
yeah,
hope everyone liked listening along, and we'll see you again next week.
So
you gotta sign off.
Yeah, I got a nice story
Okay.
from the PT. It's a nice, probably shorter story, and I don't think even if he listens that he'll mind. This is about my round 4 against Bob Maher, and just a pretty funny thing that happened in game 2, the game I won. And I guess to preface this, there's kind of a known thing. They call it, being like an MTG boomer, which is obviously a little bit of a play because they're not that old. But people that have done really well a long time ago, they often, they have a lot of similarities you find where it's not anything bad, but, they really think about the game, I think, in a way that's kind of older and less about board presence and more about card draw. I'm not surprised at all he played Omniscience, by the way. And then
that's kind of an old-timey Magic thing to play like a combo deck with lots of card draw and that sort of thing, for sure.
But anyways, this story is, and I guess the other thing is they're pretty often, it's not weird to see them reading cards. Anyways, I'm playing a mirror match against him. He has Get Lost registered in his sideboard. I learned after the match he did not board them in. He asked me some questions about it. But in game 2, at some point, he casts a Scroll Shift on his Impended White Overlord, and I Get Lost it in response. And I don't actually even have real map tokens. I just have a little Sharpie thing that says map.
Mm-hmm.
And I get them out, and he asks me, what are maps? And there's a card he registered for the Pro Tour that made. And so I tell him, they're 1-mana artifacts that you can pay 1 and sacrifice at sorcery speed and target creature explores. And I also even say, they're artifacts, and I have this Clarion Conqueror in play, so you can't activate them as long as the Conqueror's in play. I just give him that one for free. And he says, okay, thanks. A couple turns play by. They're kind of long turns, so maybe it's even only one turn. Like, he plays his turn, I play mine, then his again. Because it's kind of a complicated game. And he goes, what's Explore? And so then I tell him what Explore does. We never call a judge. He believes me. I'm honest with him.
Do you think he wanted to ask that like the turn previous, but he's like, we'll wait.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I don't want to sound that dumb. Space it out a little bit.
That one's pretty funny. And then another turn or so passes, and he goes to crack a map, and I say, I still have Clarion Conqueror. You can't do that. Which I still don't call a judge over, and he beats me, and he said he was appreciative of me being patient about it. I'm like, yeah, of course. But I thought that was pretty funny. And I guess I'll add to that with another short story. This was against Simon Nielsen. He sits down, and I had just mentioned, because I had just punted against his teammate, Carl, and I'd mentioned I just feel kind of spacier than I have in a while at these events, and I'm pretty tired. And then anyways, I grab some dice, and I look at him, and he's looking at me right in the eyes, and I say, do you want to do high roll with 2d6? And he says, yeah. He shakes his head. So I'm rolling these dice in my hand, and he's not saying anything. I'm just staring at him. And I say, okay, you're going to call it in the air? And he says, yeah. And I roll these dice, and he rolls a 9, and he doesn't say anything. And then he laughs, and he goes, oh my God, I'm just spacing out. I didn't know what you were doing at all. He says, sorry. He's like, can we just do high roll? I'm like, yeah, sure. We tie like 3 times. He wins the die roll. And then as he wins the die roll and he's shuffling a bit more, he realizes how confusing that must have been for me. And he starts cracking up the fact that he said yes out loud to both my questions, did nothing. So that's just,
he was just, something in him was speaking, but he wasn't speaking. Like, he wasn't listening. He was just on autopilot speaking.
Yeah.
I bet that's does he strike you as a more introverted or a more extroverted person?
He's a pretty extroverted person. He actually took pictures of all his opponents, including me, and posted like on his social media stories and little recaps of each match.
Yeah, I would have guessed that that'd be kind of like an extrovert thing to do, where you just sort of talk and it's like autopilot for you.
Yeah.
You're just so used to doing it, but yeah. That's pretty funny. The map thing is hilarious, dude.
Yeah, that's a classic, I think. MTV
He's like, what?
Story.
You gave me these maps. What do you mean I can't use them? What do they do?
Well, also, when I played the Clarion Conqueror, he's surveying his board very intensively and like reading the Clarion Conqueror. And I just tell him, I'm like, it's just your Ghost Vacuum, which is why I felt obligated when I had the maps to add to that, But I'm like, I boarded it in to stop your Ghost Vacuum. Like, and he's like, oh, okay.
Gotcha. He's like, what on earth? Does this do something I don't think it does?
Yeah.
It's cool that some of those old players can come back and play whenever. I still think that's cool.
Yeah, they've got their one Hall of Fame invite a year, and I think that's still nice.
They usually do pretty good too, right?
Yeah, I think Bob Maher went 10-6 maybe even, which means he gets another invite this year if he wants it.
Yeah.
But I know he owns a game store. He's a pretty busy guy.
Yeah. Well, it's when you grow up, I guess. I haven't done that yet, so I don't know. But